Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. This episode has to do with northwest Kenya, the climatology of Africa, and what was going on about 5,000 years ago in that area. They found a mysterious burial monument in northwest Kenya, near Lake Turkana, and they found a bunch of riches and artifacts in this burial ground. What they think is a burial ground. But I want to go over this article and kind of comment on what it actually is. I mean, yeah, it's probably a burial ground, but I've heard a lot of things be described as burial grounds, and like Göbekli Tepe, right? But I think they're incorrectly just burial grounds. I think it could have been something else, maybe. But I have my reasons for thinking that, but let's just go over the article. It's titled Ancient Riches Discovered at Mysterious Burial Monument. From gerbil tooth headdresses to ivory rings, a site in Kenya offers an unprecedented look into a 5,000-year-old herding community. Okay. So right away, these were pastoralists. These are people going around the grasslands and finding whatever it is they could find and live off of. Let's just set our sights on northwest Kenya for a second. Near Lake Turkana, there's a mound nestled between two prominent ridges of dark volcanic rock. The mound, known as the Lothagem North Pillar Site, has stood for some 5,000 years. Okay, let's get a picture of this right here. So this is the actual site. You can see all the different colored sediments here. I mean, there's a lot of loose sand here. Anyway, so the North Pillar Site, we'll just refer to it as Lothagem North Pillar Site. International team of researchers, they started looking at it in more detail. Their results were in the PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which I will link in the description. And their conclusion is that it was a meticulously planned cemetery that generations of mobile herders returned to for hundreds of years to lay their dead to rest. So this cemetery has been in use for a long time, and if it was used by generation after generation, then it must have been a highly significant site for those people to constantly return to and pay respects to the dead. So let's see how they got, like, what they actually did. They only excavated this is my first issue with this. They only excavated a small fraction of the 7,500 square foot burial mound out of respect for the sanctity of the monument. So it yielded a trove of pottery, jewelry, and other riches of the time. I mean, if you're excavating it anyway, I mean, you might as well just do the whole thing. I mean, you're still disrespecting it, right? You still made an excavation. You just made a small one. If you're walking on ice, you might as well dance, right? You're already desecrating it, so just try to find as much as you could. I don't know. That kind of, the reasoning kind of puts me off a little bit. But they were still able to find out that it was the oldest and largest monumental cemetery yet found in the region. Remember, this is East Africa, it's like Kenya, Northeast Africa. It's a lot of stuff has gone on there, and I'm sure there's a lot of information. And they could have gotten more if they continued excavations. Fiona Marshall, an archaeologist at Washington University in St. Louis, says this work is completely path-breaking. I agree. That's why you guys should have excavated it more. The site offers an unprecedented glimpse into the life and death of ancient East African herders. Some of the stuff they found were gerbil tooth headdresses and hippo tusk bangles. These headdresses were actually really interesting. I wish they had a picture of it, but they don't. Researchers collected samples of charcoal and ostrich egg to date the site. Interesting. And they also used ground-penetrating radar to non-destructively look into the mound's subsurface structure, then excavated a 43-square-foot section to document its contents. Okay, so they used ground-penetrating radar to see what the rough structure was underneath the surface. And then they excavated anyway. So I don't know. Like, again, they should just gone furthermore. Maybe maybe I'm kind of being a little bit hard on them. Maybe not them, but someone else. It was someone else's call, and they just said, "Okay, you're allowed. We'll give you an inch, but don't take a mile." Maybe it was that sort. Maybe there was a third party involved. That's probably it, actually. The excavation revealed that ancient peoples had cleared an expanse of sand just smaller than the size of a volleyball court on the shores of Lake Turkana. They dug the burial cavity over 3 feet deep to the soft bedrock below. Okay. Well, we'll get into more into Lake Turkana later, because I think that lake in and of itself is a huge mystery. But we'll keep going. Women of all ages, men of all ages, babies are all buried in the pits carved in bedrock, and because of this, they thought because of the fact that all these different types of different demographics of people were buried in the same spot, in addition to the equal distribution of goods they were buried with, they think that it was a more egalitarian society. It wasn't a hierarchical society, based on just the little that they excavated. Remember, they didn't excavate the whole thing, so coming to any concrete conclusion now, it would be foolhardy. In the small region excavated, they identified 36 people. They estimate that the mountain contains some 580 burials. I mean, yeah, like you could if everything is a burial, but what if there's a part of it that's not? What if there's like another ceremonial part of the site this is why I don't think it's a cemetery right off the bat. I mean, yeah, there are dead bodies there. What if there are other things? What if there's like maybe just excavated was where the dead bodies were, but maybe there's a cathedral-like religious, it's like a ceremonial site next to it in the part that's still underground. I would have liked to see the photos of the ground penetrating radar and see exactly what they mapped out. That would have been really interesting. One of the most remarkable pieces is a headdress composed of 405 gerbil teeth, which would have required more than 100 animals to create. That is pretty interesting. In order to have something like this headdress, you need to have, again, all kinds of infrastructure already installed in your society for that to happen. And the gerbils weren't domesticated at that time either, which is even more impressive. So there had to be a contingent of people trapping a large number of rodents. So they were highly successful and highly, I would have to say, knowledgeable, because they were able to create in excess these things. So they must have been doing really well. And we'll get into the context of their time. We'll put the climate, what it was, but more on the site. Lothringham North was a surprisingly large and structurally complex cemetery. Exactly. So that's exactly why I don't think it was just a cemetery. Everything about the site indicates that there was a master plan for each architectural element. Yeah, forward thinking. Someone actually drew it up and then they carried out the plan. So I don't think this is just hunter-gatherers making this. But that's just me. The ancient herders didn't fill the burial cavity to capacity. That's interesting. They decided to refill the mountain, much like Göbekli Tepe. They refilled it, but they didn't fill all the way. So around 4,300 years ago, they made the decision to fill the remaining space with earth and create the massive mound. It slopes extending well beyond the bounds of the cavity. Okay, so they made it into just like Göbekli Tepe, which means pot-bellied hill in Turkish. They made a mound. For whatever reason, we don't know why. Here's an interesting tidbit. Cemeteries often develop in unplanned aggregate fashion, explains Hildebrand. One person is buried and then a few more. Eventually you have a cemetery. But the complexity of the site emphasizes the monument's significance to the ancient community. So yes, who crafted the spot that could be used for generations. So I don't think, the way he says it, cemeteries are, like, it kind of happens randomly, like on a whim. I don't know how true that is in maybe in a tribe, a smaller tribes, but when you have like a complex society, I think that kind of stuff, there's more to it than just that. So I think he's kind of on the money here when he says there is a huge significance to the site, and my contention is that the significance seems to be so apparent that it couldn't have been just a cemetery. When you think about monumentality in lots of other parts of the world, it is associated with social inequality. Yeah, like having slaves build everything, right? I think that's what she's talking about. Yeah, built with low status labor for high status occupants, but that doesn't seem to be the case at Lothringham North. The equal distribution of these stunning grave goods and arrangement of all ages and sexes together suggests that the society was non-hierarchical, just like what I said earlier. I don't know if you have enough evidence to to make this claim because you haven't even excavated the entire site. I don't know, it's an interesting take for a scientist to say that so early on in the excavations. Yeah, this conclusion might change with larger scale excavations. This guy from San Bernardino, Cal State San Bernardino, he's right. He praises the work for its thoroughness, but notes that excavating a larger portion may reveal overlooked patterns. And yeah, of course, they haven't even looked at the whole thing yet. It's like if I had a castle, right, and then I had a dungeon part with like I put people, I buried people there, and or people paid me to bury their dead there, and then 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years later, you came and excavated it, and you only excavated that part. Yeah, you would think the whole thing was a cemetery, but in reality, it was a castle, right? That's what I'm getting here. There might be a tip of the iceberg situation. Here's the climate part. Here's where it gets really interesting. So the origins of the mound extend back some 5,000 years, close to the close of the African humid period. Now, the African humid period was the time when everything that you see with Africa now, like the Sahara Desert and all the desertification of that part of the continent, that it used to be close to rainfall. It was raining all the time. There were all kinds of plants growing, and Lake Turkana was likely double in size because it was raining all the time, and people were thriving. Like what I said earlier, when they made that headdress, people were thriving, and this is when things were turning, when things were making a turn for the worse in terms of climate. Like when the humid period ended, the lake level dropped and fishing became more unpredictable. Grassy plains started opening up, and then that kind of paved the way for paved the fate for the people, the next generations, where they started grazing and they started becoming more mobile. I don't know if everybody just dropped their fishing ways and their hunting and gathering, but those communities apparently broke up, and then there were more nomadic people because of the direct result of the landscape around them transformed under their feet. See, it's I think in a past episode a few weeks ago, I talked about how climate, like, oh yeah, I remember now, when the blue-eyed people who suddenly came into Israel, something like this probably would have to happen for there to be mass migration. So there was probably a mass migration going on here as well, which isn't in the article, but it would make sense to me. And then the people who stayed just adapted. Either move or adapt, basically, is what I think happened. The landscape around them transformed under their feet. Some of them would have to remain on the move and in the continual hunt for green pasture lands, or other people just had to leave. Every year, people were having to rethink things. So this is a huge time of transition. I would like to see some follow-up studies on this, see if they could track what people went where. And again, a huge excavation would probably, or an expanded excavation would probably answer a lot of these questions, or at least provide new leads. Overall, the new study challenges our ideas about connections between monumental building programs and social inequality, and emphasizes the complexity of ancient societies. Of course, if we want to look at the full range of human experience, sites like this open our minds to other possibilities. This is a really poignant story for us to consider today. Of course, there are a lot of changes going on. These ancient people came together to create something massive. Either they came together or they dispersed, right? It probably led to much stronger communities that were able to operate in much more strategic fashion. There's a larger message for us. Okay, let's take a look. So here's the end of African humid period, just to give you guys a little follow-up. So after the Younger Dryas, the climate warmed around much of the world and human settlements expanded. In Africa, monsoon rains grew stronger and spread northward into the Sahara. Instead of being the sandy desert now, Sahara was a steppe covered in grasses and shrubs. This inviting environment, hunters domesticated buffalo and goats and developed an early system of symbolic art. Yeah, see, so the warmer it gets, usually when I always talk about superimposing climate science and climate history onto human history, and whenever it gets warmer and there's abundance, stuff gets done, especially in terms of the advancement of culture and society. So it's no different here. And then around 5,000 years ago, which is the date of this site, things started to go south in terms of it being a highly not just a livable place, but a place where large populations could thrive. Now here's the carved pendants and bracelets and stuff that they found in the bodies. I mean, this looks like something I can go to Venice and buy right off the street. I mean, look how great this stuff looks. I mean, you could take one of these and just go to California and go to town, and you'll find a bunch of people willing to buy this. Except, I don't know if they'd believe you if you said it's 5,000 years old, but you could definitely try, right? Yeah, those things they're beautiful. And then here, yeah, I showed you that picture already. And then there's one more. Yeah, this thing, the stone palette carved in the shape of a bovine. So this is supposed to be a cow. I don't know. It kind of looks like a bull too. I don't know. But it's definitely, it's not just a random rock though. That's for sure. Someone definitely made that. And then here's Lake Turkana. So Lake Turkana actually lies between a valley, and this is the size of it now. But back then it was twice the size, and you can probably, I wish I had a better map, but you could probably see it probably just took the shape of its surroundings. It was probably, even in this state, it's still one of the biggest saltwater lakes in the world. Yeah, this is really interesting. And this is the site of, whenever you have a lake like this, there's usually, and the rivers, the Omo River at the north, there's probably a lot of stuff under the ground here if proper excavations and proper surveying are done. And then here's, in relation to the rest of Africa, oh, it's actually Midwest, or Mideast, sorry. Not northeast, like I incorrectly said earlier. So what do you guys think about this article? I'm sure this is not the only burial monument that is in Africa. I mean, Africa is gigantic, so there's probably all kinds of stuff that no one's even thinking of excavating. But here's something that I do know. All of these things are pretty well preserved. And it makes sense since it's Africa. I mean, there's all kinds of overgrowth and all kinds of plants have more freedom to grow there than anywhere else, except for like maybe the Amazon or something like that. But a lot of stuff tends to get preserved in an organic environment like that, or a dry environment like in the Sahara. I bet the Sahara has a lot of crazy stuff in there too. Yeah, I think this is a great read. I'll link the scientific article below, as well as the regular article that I found off of National Geographic, I believe. Yeah, National Geographic. And let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. And have a good weekend.